Good morning, Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce members. This is Drew Kamp, President and CEO of the Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce, with our January 28th weekly legislative update. I wanted to start by thanking everyone who was able to join us for the legislative roundtable over the lunch hour. I think we had a lot of really good conversation and touched on some really important topics. We'll continue to have those conversations with our great group of legislators throughout the legislative session on the fourth Friday of every month. We do hope to get those to being back in person. When they do move back in person, we will offer hybrid options in the event that people may be best suited by having a virtual option as well. But I did want to just touch on some of the key pieces that we did talk about during the legislative roundtable this afternoon. In the event that you are not able to attend, we did record that, so we will make it readily available to folks via our YouTube channel and on our legislative update, in addition to my update here. You'll have to provide me a little bit of flexibility. I am home with my daughter today. She is a little ill, so she's not at daycare. So it's daddy daycare today at home. But it worked out just fine for the legislative roundtable, and it'll work out just fine for this video. But a few key issues that I wanted to make sure that I touched on are really just some tax bills. That's really the predominant issue we are seeing out of the legislature right now. So if you're keeping tabs on anything in the legislature, there's now the governor's proposal, which in very much brevity is a 4% flat tax, no corporate tax reform, with the caveat there is not changes to tax credits. That is not the same in the Senate version, which I'll touch on later. And then the House version, which is very similar to the governor's version as well. But there are some unique changes in some very small details that are different in that one as well. And then there's the Senate proposal that really is kind of the one that's a little bit more different than both the House and the Senate, the House and the governor's version all include a flat tax. The governor and House is more of a 4% flat tax going forward. They would eliminate the retirement income tax and things along those lines as well. But the Senate version has a lot more to it. As we heard in our legislative roundtable much more eloquently from the senator who wrote it, Senator Dawson, there's a lot of different provisions in there. But one of the big things that I want to touch on the Senate tax bill is that it would go to a flat tax. It would be 3.6%, so a little bit less than what the House and the governor is proposing. And then it would also provide a means based on revenue projections and some metrics that would need to be hit to actually eliminate the personal income tax over time. So when we look at that 4% and 3.6% flat tax, we're talking just about the personal income tax provision and personal income tax side of things, not the corporate income tax side of things. On the Senate side, they actually do look at the corporate income tax side of things and getting that rate pulled down a little bit. To do that, they do go in and look at some of the tax credit provisions that we have, whether it's with high quality jobs, the research activities credit, the Endow Iowa credit. There's some changes that are proposed in there within the specific legislation that would then create some of that revenue to make up for some of the changes that would be proposed to the corporate income tax side of things as well. As I said in the roundtable, one thing that's important to note is there are a lot of corporations, not all, but quite a few in the state of Iowa who actually pay personal income tax more so than corporate income tax, and they might not even pay corporate income tax. They might just pay personal income tax. So as you look at these considerations, it's important to keep those things in mind. Another piece that I wanted to make sure that I touched on as well within the Senate proposal, as I talked about the sales tax exemptions and some other tax credits and things along those lines that are getting looked at. Those are obviously revenue providers and generators that help offset some of the cost that the bill would have. The Senate bill also would phase out retirement income taxation as well, and would do some other pieces with regards to some personal income tax and other tax credit pieces that I won't go into the details on. But one thing I also wanted to note is the fact that it would kick in IWIL, and IWIL is that 3/8 cent sales tax increase that would then go to fund things for natural resources and outdoor recreation. One thing that's important to note is it would not actually increase the sales tax. What it would do is it would kick in an additional 1% sales tax, cutting out the 3/8 cents for the Natural Resource and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund, or IWIL, and then actually use the local option sales tax, take that portion out, make it state funded rather than the current system it is, and then keep the sales tax rate still at a total of 7%, which is really important for border communities like us who are competing with Nebraska or others who obviously throughout the state may be competing with other states. That's a very important thing. We want to continue to keep that competitive advantage, and we think that that does that. We talked specifically about some of the implications that touching Lost and messing with Lost could have for municipalities. Those conversations are going to continue to happen. As you can imagine, I believe the mayor said it's about 9.5, not between 9.5 and $10 million that in local option sales tax that the city gets every year, largely goes into infrastructure. So very important funding mechanism and tool. So we just need to make sure we continue to keep tabs on that. And the mayor and Councilmember Hannon did a good job doing so on our legislative roundtable to make sure that there was some clarity on those provisions and what that would look like to ensure that the city would continue to receive those resources. On workforce, there's a lot of pieces happening on workforce. We're lucky to have Representative Segrist serving on the House's working group for workforce. They're going to look at a lot of different issues. But some of the key things that are really getting looked at within workforce are, not only Future Ready Iowa and some continued funding for those provisions within that, and obviously education and where that fits into workforce development as well. But childcare is something that we've seen in a variety of bills. There are some pieces with looking at increasing ratios for care. So you could potentially have more children under care with one person. We'll see if those bills go anywhere, but those are things that really did come out of the governor's child care task force. And that's really the guiding document and the guiding policy provisions that are being put forward for some of these bills specifically coming out of the House. There's also the medical malpractice issue. That's something that's being looked at, that one that would cap non-economic damages at $1 million. It would make us more competitive with the state of Nebraska. There's also trucker tort reform or liability reform. That's really important as well, because obviously we have a ton of transportation logistics in the state of Iowa, especially here in Council Bluffs. We're nationally on the map for transportation logistics, and Paula and her team do such a good job in selling our area in that regard. But we also need truckers. That's another big thing, obviously, for workforce and the supply chain issues we're seeing nationally. So that's something we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to really provide some liability reform for that specific sector as well. Construction manager at risk really gets into bidding and how you can do that in what a lot of people are saying is a more competitive manner. That's something that sits in the House. It's passed the Senate last year, so the House is waiting to see if they can get the 51 votes for it. Representative Segrist provided us an update, passed out of the State Government Committee, I believe it was yesterday. So we'll see how that continues to move forward in the House going forward in the session. Unemployment and reform, that's really happening in the Senate. There's some pieces to try to do some changes to really push people back into the workforce, once again, making that a big workforce component as well. There's a WIN-TIF bill out of the House Ways and Means Committee. Representative Height is looking at it, and it's really some of the counties are using windmills as a TIF generation mechanism and then investing it back for TIF revenue into their county and into their county for community economic development, workforce, things along those lines. But they are looking at doing some changes to that, specifically with the school foundation, the 540 levy. That's an important thing to note. That's the biggest levy within your tax increment. So that's something that's important to note as any changes are made with that. And we'll always monitor bills that have something to do with TIF. We did talk about school funding on the call on the legislative roundtable as well. We know the governor put out about 2.5%. It seems like in having conversations initially with the chambers and legislators that they may come in around that. That remains to be seen. They usually try to get that done in the first month, so they're coming up on that. So that should be something that the Education Appropriations Subcommittee is really kind of looking at putting out here in the not too distant future. We also talked about the increase for pre-K. To really help with that early childhood education daycare piece from 0.5% FTE to 1% FTE, or 0.75 even percent FTE. That's important because obviously it would mean more money to schools to invest in those different provisions specifically. We also talked about the renewable fuels bill with SIRE in our community. That's an important piece to make sure that we continue to provide some good certainty and a bright future for our ethanol providers and our renewable fuels providers. So that's something they've made some changes to last year's bill that seem more palatable to all sides. So we shall see if that moves forward. It seems to have a pretty bright future. It's a priority of the governor as well. So that's something that we hope to get some clarity on and see move forward here in the not too distant future in the legislative session as well. There's lots of other issues that are being looked at right now. Some of those have not moved through committees. Port authorities, as an example, that's something we're keeping a close eye on, being that that's something we view could be mutually beneficial between us and Omaha, especially on the riverfront. So that's something we'll continue to watch in both with the Senate with Senator Kokler and also in the House. as well in the House Ways and Means. So that's something we'll continue to watch closely. We think those bills are really important to making us even more competitive in a lot of different ways. So that's something we're excited about and we're monitoring closely. With that, I will stop the legislative update as far as the policy items go. Excuse me. There are a lot of different moving parts, as you can imagine. It is early in the session, but as we heard on the roundtable, there may be an opportunity to actually get out early. We actually have the major tax bills from the House, Senate, and the governor already on the docket and already out there for consideration. That's a big first step. And then also once we get the education funding, excuse me, figured out, that's a huge deal as well. That's the largest portion of the budget.